On May 23, 2019, Senator Menendez called a high-level USDA official and insisted, and this is according to the indictment, and insisted in sum and substance that the USDA stop opposing the monopoly contract in Egypt. So Senator Menendez allegedly used the power of his Senate position to try to get our government to stop opposing the contract held by the guy accused of bribing the senator, to stop opposing the contract held by the company who was paying his wife, and to stop opposing the contract which was harming U.S. businesses. And if that is not an example of a U.S. senator putting the interest of a foreign business over the interest of the United States, I don't know what is.
I am so damn tired of being lied to. I don't think I can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies, but I'm not gonna buy it anymore.
Hello, my friend, and thank you for listening to the 285th episode of Congressional Dish. I'm your host, Jennifer Briney. And this episode of your favorite congressional podcast is going to show up in your feeds a few days before Thanksgiving. And so today, I wanted to make sure that we are all armed with some facts about some dudes in Congress who may very well end up as subjects of fairly politically safe conversations around your holiday dinner table. Because right now, there are two members of Congress who are under criminal indictment for a variety, a buffet, if you will, of crimes. And yet neither of them, as of this recording, has resigned from their lawmaking positions, which means that we could have two criminals in positions of power over our lives, positions that entrust them to make the laws that we all have to follow, laws that they, according to the United States Justice Department, are not following themselves. And this is a fairly safe topic to bring up at Thanksgiving or whatever holiday comes after it, if you do dare to wade into the state of the country during those meals, because the issue of likely criminals in lawmaking positions is not a partisan thing at this time, because one of them is a Republican, one is a Democrat. And this also isn't a problem with just one branch of Congress, because one is a member of the House of Representatives and one is a member of the Senate. And so today I'm going to give you all the dirt so that if either of these dudes do get brought up, you'll at least be able to set the record straight about what they're accused of, or just have all the juicy gossip about what they're accused of. And this information is coming straight from the criminal indictments and a report released by a Congressional Ethics Committee. This dirt is fact-checked. And if anyone tries to call bullshit on you, you know that you can go to this episode's show notes where I have the indictments, the report, the articles, the sound clip sources, everything that I used to make this episode, and everything you'll need to say, no, Uncle Rob, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about, and I can prove it, which is the most satisfying holiday feeling possible. I'm also going to tell you what Congress is fixin' to do about the alleged criminals in their midst, so that you can make your feelings known to this Congress in case you don't find their self-policing to be strict enough for you, or if you find it too harsh, which, by the way, you won't. And if you enjoy this episode or any episode of Congressional Dish, while you're having these conversations, please remember to share this show with the people in your life who would appreciate it the way you do. Because not many people go searching for podcasts about Congress. Almost everyone who gets hooked on this show gets hooked because it was recommended to them by someone like you. Someone they trust, like a close friend or family member, at an event like, say, Thanksgiving, or Christmas, or Hanukkah, or Friendsgiving, or your company's annual holiday booze fest. And a great way to hook them, in my experience, is to physically subscribe them to the show on their phone. Just ask what their favorite podcast app is and ask them to open it. And then you do the searching, find Congressional Dish, and then press follow. And then long after they've forgotten that conversation ever took place, they'll see this show subscribe to their feed and maybe press play. Because they'll be like, oh yeah, I remember how this got here. You said you liked this show. Okay, I'll give this one a try. And then they do. And then they find out that the show is not boring as or partisan or even about politics. And then they're hooked, and you've done your part to help the show. because marketing effort is appreciated in the value for value business model that funds this show. Keeping every episode ad-free and preserving my ability to be honest with you, no matter how unpopular the framing may be to the corporate world, while not risking enormous chunks of my livelihood every time I do. In this business model, this crowd-funded model, you are my customer. The customers for me are not advertisers because they don't exist. And I don't use your money on marketing because word of mouth is proven to be the best method of marketing a podcast, especially one as different as this one is. And so, if you want to give back, you can do some work for the show and get someone to try this out. You can be our marketing department because not all payments in the value for value business model have to be in cash. And by the way, as I have for the last decade, while I'm giving thanks this week at my own holiday table, I will absolutely be thanking every single person who has supported this project over the years. In absolutely insane times like these, I do feel incredibly blessed to have the ability to write history as I see it in real time, to create an outlet for telling stories of our time from the perspective of just a normal person who's outside the oligarchy or the duopoly or the corporatocracy. You know, this is written by someone who is not one of them. And I still don't know what to call them, but I just know that I'm someone who is affected by their actions. I'm one of the so-called little people, and I'm proud of it. And so I'm thankful for my fellow littles who support me in this project that more and more every day harnesses our collective power to fight their corruption by exposing what they do while entrusted to write our laws. And so thank you for supporting my work because I think details about what lawmakers do with their power after the elections is extremely important. And that's why it's important to take a good, hard look at what the Justice Department and Ethics Committee have told Americans about what Representative George DeVolder Santos of New York and Senator Robert Menendez of New Jersey have done with their positions of power. So let's get started with Representative George DeVolder Santos, who is a guy who is so mysterious and who is so full of shit about his background that we really don't even seem to know his name. Because while I think damn near all of us have heard of George Santos, the indictment calls him George DeVolder Santos, and he set up a couple shady businesses for himself using the DeVolder name. But just for this episode, I'm just going to call him George Santos because that's how we all know him, and because it's one fewer word and I'm linguistically lazy. But reading from the indictment that charges Representative Santos with 23 crimes, it says, quote, Representative Santos's congressional campaigns were built around his backstory as a successful man of means, a grandson of Holocaust survivors, and graduate from Baruch College? I don't know. I've never heard of it. But with a master's degree in business administration from New York University, who went on to work at Citigroup and Goldman Sachs, owned multiple properties, and was the beneficiary of a family trust worth millions of dollars left by his mother, who passed after the 9/11 terrorist attacks as a result of long-term health effects related to being at one of the towers. No part of that backstory has been found to be true, unquote. He just lied about all of it. But what the House Ethics Committee has found to be true is that Representative Santos was frequently in debt, had an abysmal credit score, and used credit cards to fund his luxury spending habits. George Santos ran for Congress first in 2020, but lost. But then he ran again in 2022 and somehow won. And he's currently representing New York's 3rd Congressional District in the House of Representatives, which is a district in the north part of Long Island and which is the wealthiest district in New York State. And the guy representing the richest district in New York, according to the House Ethics Committee, in a report that they released on November 16th after conducting an investigation into George Santos, he has allegedly committed so many ethics violations and crimes that the report called it, quote, unprecedented, unquote, and said, quote, the sheer scope of the violations at issue here is highly unusual and damning, unquote. And sure enough, George Santos is accused of doing a lot of shit. So a lot of his violations and crimes were essentially campaign finance violations. So for example, he's accused of faking having made loans from his personal finances to his campaign. According to the Ethics Committee report, during the 2020 and 2022 elections, Representative Santos's campaign said he made personal loans totaling nearly $800,000 to his campaign committee and $27,000 in personal loans to his leadership PAC. But the actual amount of loans that he made to his campaign was $3,500, which is less than 0.5% of the money that he said he loaned to his campaign. And then Representative Santos was repaid for tens of thousands of dollars for those loans from the campaign that he never made, essentially stealing his own campaign funds. Another way that he's accused of stealing campaign funds was by setting up a consulting business to act as a corrupt middleman to funnel money to himself. So, for example, his company was hired for $110,000 by another New York campaign after George Santos recommended it, saying that it was, quote, a widely used campaign organization for plenty of the politicians in Mar-a-Lago, unquote. Which, in case you've been on an expedition to Antarctica for the last decade, Mar-a-Lago is the country club and home of Donald Trump. And so, while they're not named in the report, I'm guessing that the campaign that hired George Santos is one that was for one of the dumb MAGA variety of candidates. And George Santos didn't tell that other campaign that he was a co-owner of the company, and the Dum campaign never bothered to check who exactly they were hiring for political services and handed over $110,000, which the company, started by George Santos, then transferred allegedly to the personal bank account of George Santos. So the way it works is it went from Dum campaign to his political services company to his own bank account. And then George Santos used the money to pay off his personal credit cards. The Ethics Committee report also details how this arrangement, campaign funds to company to personal bank account, was used to transfer $50,000 that came from just two donors, each one of them providing $25,000, which is way over the legal limit. And one of those situations is part of his criminal indictment. So, reading almost verbatim from the indictment, Santos devised and executed a scheme to defraud supporters of his candidacy by fraudulently inducing supporters via emails, texts, and phone calls to contribute funds to the company that he co-owned under the false pretense that the money would be used to support his candidacy. But then he actually spent thousands of dollars of those funds on personal expenses, including luxury designer clothing and his own credit card payments. And one fascinating detail to me of that part of the indictment was that George Santos told at least one of the suckers who gave him money that the company he co-owned was a 501c4 social welfare organization, which he said could accept unlimited campaign donations. Which means that alleged criminals saw the same thing that I've seen in the 501c4 social welfare organization structure. He saw, and I've seen, that it is an enormous legal loophole. Except that instead of being outraged and wanting the loophole to be closed, George Santos saw the loophole as an opportunity. He's just too stupid to use the loophole properly, which means he's pretty damn stupid because this loophole is used by both parties all the time to get unlimited campaign funds and keep them secret. And if everything I just said went over your head, then you must be a relatively new listener because we've been watching 501c4 so-called social welfare organizations for a very long time on this show, starting around the time that the Republican Party tried to impeach the IRS commissioner in 2016 for cracking down on these funnels for secret campaign contributions. In other words, when the Republican Party tried to impeach the IRS commissioner for doing his job. Now, of course, if you've heard of this outside of this show, you probably don't remember it that way because no one bothered to explain it to us that way. You might remember this drama, if you remember it at all, as when the Republicans threw a huge hissy fit claiming that the IRS was targeting conservatives. But it was all bullshit. What they were really pissed about is that the IRS was targeting their huge, unlimited, secret campaign contributions. Because one of the jobs that the IRS has is the job of determining which organizations are qualified for tax-exempt status. And there are different categories for tax-exempt status, each with their own set of rules. So, for example, charities are eligible for tax-exempt status under Section 501c3 of the IRS Code. And political organizations are eligible for tax-exempt status under Section 527 of the IRS Code, but they have to publish who their donors are. And there's also a category for tax-exempt status for organizations that are promoting social welfare programs. That is Section 501c4. And the IRS targeting scandal had to do with organizations that were claiming to be for social welfare and trying to get approval under Section 501c4 to be officially a social welfare organization. Because you see, like I said before, there is a category for political organizations to be tax exempt, Section 527. But political organizations that exist to influence our votes have to disclose their donors. Social welfare organizations don't have to disclose their donors. And so one of the jobs of the tax law enforcement officers at the IRS is to determine if a group claiming to be a 501c4 is really promoting the social welfare, or if the group is a political group pretending to be a social welfare group in order to hide their donors. And that job became much more difficult in 1959 when a law enforcement decision was made by the IRS. In 1959, the IRS changed one word in the statute, and it had huge repercussions because instead of the social welfare organizations having to operate exclusively to promote social welfare, well, in 1959, that word exclusively was swapped for primarily, which meant that social welfare organizations with their secret donors could spend their money on politics now, just as long as they could claim that politics wasn't their primary purpose, which has been openly and outrageously abused, especially during the Obama years. To show you just how political these 501c4s have become, the example I always use is that Karl Rove, who is the guy credited with being absolutely politically ruthless and who got George W. Bush elected. Well, Karl Rove had a social welfare organization. And as usual, watching Republicans' bad deeds and using them as instruction manuals, the Democrats had social welfare organizations set up for the Obama and Clinton campaigns. So these are clearly being used for primarily political purposes. But when the IRS investigated that, the beneficiaries of the system lost their shit and tried to impeach the IRS commissioner. And ever since then, there's really been no meaningful enforcement happening at the IRS in regards to the 501c4 social welfare organizations. The determinations of which ones are primarily being used for social welfare and which are not is just too subjective. And the IRS agents, after seeing the public shaming that the IRS commissioner and his coworkers were put through in 2016, well, now the IRS agents are scared shitless to even touch this topic. And so 501c4s, despite what the text of the law says, right now really are allowing unlimited amounts to be spent on political campaigns. And the donors are being allowed to donate that money in the shadows. And George Santos saw that structure and said, "Yup, let's tell him that the company connected to my personal bank account is a 501c4. That'll get him to fork over the cash." And you know what? It worked. But the problem was that his company wasn't a registered 501c4. It was a private business. And once the dumb Richie Riches transferred their money to the company they thought was a legal but immoral vessel for unlimited secret donations, well, their money was then transferred to other accounts, including to George Santos's personal bank account. And then on top of that, George Santos just straight up gangster stole from his donors. Basically, he took the credit card numbers that were given to him for one-time campaign contributions and then used those credit card numbers over and over again without authorization. So for example, he charged $44,800 to the credit card of some moron who actually wanted to give George Santos $5,800. And then he spent that dope's money on his own campaigns for other candidates, and transferred $11,000 of it to his personal bank account. There's paper trails for all of this. And Representative Santos did this to other people as well. And with that money, he bought himself so many things. So he withdrew thousands of dollars in cash, including from an ATM at a casino. He spent over $4,000 at Hermes, which is a luxury brand that, until very recently, I used to pronounce as Hermes, but it's not Hermes. I'm not fancy enough to even know how to say that brand, but George Santos spent $4,000 of stolen money at it, and he also spent $6,000 at Ferragamo stores. He also is really into his own personal beauty, and he spent $1,000 for an anesthetician, and he spent $2,900 on Botox. He also spent his stolen money on vacations, so he spent $2,200 for one night at a resort in Atlantic City, where no one could find any campaign events. He also spent over $3,300 for a weekend Airbnb in the Hamptons, where there was also no campaign events. And he used campaign funds to pay his primary housing rent. And then there is a fun little detail in here, but we don't know the dollar amounts. But he did spend unknown amounts of these campaign funds for OnlyFans. So God only knows what kind of kink he was looking at the OnlyFans. So that's a fun one. I would like to know a lot more about that. But unfortunately, the details are slim. But on top of all the stealing and spending on pleasuring himself in various ways, George Santos also deceived the Republican Party. And he did this, allegedly, all of this is allegedly, by lying on his financial reports, saying that the contributions came from fake donors, like his relatives and other people that he had met, but who had wisely never given George Santos any money. In her testimony to the Ethics Committee, the woman who helped George Santos with all of his financial fury testified that their actions were intended to artificially inflate the campaign's fundraising totals in order to meet thresholds set by the Republican National Political Committee, which for just one of their 3 phases of qualifications required George Santos and presumably any other candidate trying to run for the House with the support of the Republican Party to raise $250,000 in just 1 quarter. And after the Santos campaign had failed to report to the Republican Party that they hit that amount in the first phase, the Republican Party told George Santos that loans and contributions from the candidate, they don't count, which is why they didn't hit the threshold. Because remember, George Santos said that he loaned his own campaign over $800,000. But since loans from candidates themselves don't count towards the threshold, that's why the Republican Party said that he didn't hit it and he wasn't going to get party support. And after that, George Santos texted his literal partner in crime, his campaign treasurer, and told her, quote, "We're going to have to do this a little different," unquote. And then they did the fake donor thing and reported that they had raised $251,550, just barely over the required $250,000, needed to prove to the party bosses that George Santos was skilled, not in lawmaking or even understanding the law, but in getting suckers to give him their money and displaying a willingness to participate in the party system based on legal bribes. And by the way, George Santos's excuse for so much of this is that he said, "Oh, my treasurer did it. I had no idea." He fully just threw his partner right under the bus. But he's going to have a real tough time if he tries to blame his treasurer for the charge in the indictment that says that George Santos also, allegedly, but backed up with a paper trail, applied for and received almost $25,000 in unemployment payments from the CARES Act for 10 months during COVID, even though George Santos was employed the entire time and was collecting a salary of $120,000 a year, meaning he stole $25,000 from U.S. taxpayers. And of course, he didn't report any of this. So he's also being charged with false statements on his 2020 and 2022 House disclosure reports, false reports to the Federal Election Commission. I mean, this guy has been indicted on 23 criminal counts. And so the other ones include falsification of a record or document, wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, unlawful monetary transactions over $10,000, theft of public money, and fraudulent application for and receipt of unemployment benefits. And by the way, before any of this even happened, George Santos has already pled guilty to committing check fraud, specifically stealing $1,300 from someone and spending it on clothes and shoes in Brazil. And so, what's going to happen? Well, I can tell you that George Santos has said that he won't be seeking re-election. But he's also said that he's not going to resign. And so since the House Ethics Committee report was released, the House Ethics Committee chairman has already filed the necessary paperwork to set up a vote to remove George Santos from Congress when Congress gets back from the Thanksgiving break. And the way that this is going to go down is that when they take the vote, the House of Representatives, if they're going to kick out George Santos, it's going to take a 2/3 majority of the House to do it. Now, there was already a vote earlier this month in November to remove George Santos from the House of Representatives, but it failed by a vote of 179 to 213. It didn't even get a majority, with a lot of members of Congress saying that they voted to keep George Santos in Congress because they didn't think it was right to punish him before the Ethics Committee investigation was complete. Well, now it's complete. And so there does seem to be a lot of support based on what I've been reading for forcibly removing him from Congress in both the Republican and Democratic parties. In fact, it is the House Republicans from New York, from the state that George Santos is currently serving, who want him out of Congress the most. And if Santos is in fact booted out of Congress, he will be just the sixth person to be so dishonored. So that is the situation with our alleged criminal in the House of Representatives. So now let's pop on over to the Senate and check out our alleged criminal over there, an alleged criminal named Robert Menendez. So Senator Robert Menendez started his career in New Jersey politics at age 20 on the Union City School Board, and then was elected up the political ladder from there. He served as the Union City mayor. He served as a state assemblyman in New Jersey. He served as a New Jersey state senator. And then he became a U.S. congressman in the House, where he served for 13 years before reaching the United States Senate in 2005, when then Senator John Corzine was elected governor of New Jersey and picked Bob Menendez to serve the rest of his Senate term. Bob Menendez has been elected senator of New Jersey in every election since. But Senator Menendez isn't just any member of Congress. He's been in the Democratic Party leadership for a very long time. So when he was in the House of Representatives during the W. Bush years, Bob Menendez was the chair of the House Democratic Caucus. Then when he moved over to the Senate during the early Obama years, Bob Menendez was the chair of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, a position that you only get if you're good at raising money from rich people for the party. And, most importantly to this story, Senator Bob Menendez, since the beginning of 2013, so for over a decade, has been one of the top two most powerful members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, depending on which party was in control of the Senate at the time. Because the Democrats have been in control of the Senate since the beginning of 2021, Senator Menendez has been the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which is one of the most important and powerful committees in Congress in regards to determining our relationships with and funding of foreign countries. And as I go through the allegations in the indictment of Senator Menendez, there are a few characters in all of these stories that you need to know about. One of the main characters is a woman named Nadine, or Bubbles, as Senator Menendez calls her, and she is the tall, blonde, out of his league young girlfriend turned trophy wife, who was unemployed and broke before she landed herself a powerful United States senator. Bob and Bubbles, which is a nickname he gave her because of her big, perky tits, I'm not making any of this up. Well, Bob and Bubbles started knocking the boots in early 2018, and the alleged law-breaking by this modern-day Bonnie and Clyde started right away. And that's because Nadine Bubbles Menendez, almost immediately after starting to date the senator, introduced Senator Menendez to her longtime friend, an Egyptian businessman named Will Hanna. And while there are a few other people involved with allegedly bribing the Menendez crime family, Will Hanna, the Egyptian businessman, is the tie that binds them all and is the main provider of many of the gifts that were given to Senator Menendez and Nadine. And one of the reasons why the Justice Department alleges that Senator Menendez and his wife were given gifts by this guy is because the senator helped Will Hanna, the Egyptian businessman, maintain a business arrangement in Egypt that made Will Hanna a lot of money by price gouging U.S. businesses. So Will Hanna's business in Egypt was a company that certified that U.S. food exports were compliant with halal standards, which ensure that foods conform with the Islamic law in the Quran, the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, and the teachings of Islamic lawyers. And in practice, I have absolutely no idea what that means in regard to food. It apparently differs significantly between different Islamic communities, which is why you need this certification process in the first place. I don't think we need to know the details. What we need to know is that Will Hanna's business certified that for Egypt. And in the spring of 2019, Will Hanna's company was given a monopoly contract by Egypt to be the only company allowed to certify what foods from the United States are and are not halal, and therefore allowed to be sold with that important label within Egypt. Now, Will Hanna's company was given that monopoly contract despite the fact that neither he nor his company had any experience with halal certification, which isn't all that surprising considering that Will Hanna is a Christian. He's not even Muslim. And I don't know how Will Hanna landed such a sweet deal. But when that contract was awarded by Egypt, Will Hanna's company started paying wifey Menendez for her consulting services, which in practice meant arranging meetings between the Egyptian businessman and her pussy-whipped senator. And the timing of those payments, with the monopoly contract being granted and then wifey Menendez getting paid, the timing of those payments is very sus, as the Gen Zers would say. And unfortunately for wifey Menendez and her Egyptian businessman buddy, who was now paying her using money from the Egyptian monopoly contract, the monopoly contract quickly started causing complaints from U.S. companies because the monopoly contract immediately increased costs for U.S. meat companies and others, in some cases increasing the prices by 10 times what they used to be. And so, acting on behalf of the multinational corporations for which our government serves, officials from the U.S. Department of Agriculture contacted the Egyptian government, asking them to reconsider that monopoly contract, because prices were better for the multinational businesses when the certifications were being done by multiple companies and not just by the monopoly owned by wifey Menendez's friend. And within a month of our government acting to try to help U.S. businesses bring down costs, the Menendez family, the Egyptian owner of the monopoly business, and an Egyptian intelligence official met in Senator Menendez's Senate office in Washington, D.C. And during that meeting, Senator Menendez was asked to help stop the United States from interfering with the monopoly contract, which was raising costs for American businesses and consumers. Put another way, Senator Menendez was asked to help a foreign business keep costs up on U.S. businesses. He was asked to do something that would cost Americans on behalf of an Egyptian business. And 2 days later, he did. According to the indictment, on May 23, 2019, Senator Menendez called a high-level USDA official and insisted, and this is according to the indictment, and insisted in sum and substance that the USDA stop opposing the monopoly contract in Egypt. So Senator Menendez allegedly used the power of his Senate position to try to get our government to stop opposing the contract held by the guy accused of bribing the senator, to stop opposing the contract held by the company who was paying his wife, and to stop opposing the contract which was harming U.S. businesses. And if that is not an example of a U.S. senator putting the interest of a foreign business over the interest of the United States, I don't know what is. And in the end, the Egyptian businessman, Will Hanna, who was paying wifey Menendez and who has been accused of bribing Senator Menendez, kept his monopoly contract. Now, Senator Menendez has been asked about this, specifically on PBS's chat box on October 28th. And so here's host David Cruz asking Senator Menendez about this part of the indictment.
And in the case of one of your co-defendants receiving a contract to certify halal.
I can't answer for my co-defendant. You'll have to ask him.
Well, the suggestion is that it was your relations with Egyptian officials that helped ease the way for him to get that contract.
David, there's a lot of suggestions. As a matter of fact, as I read the indictment, there's a lot of inferences, but not a lot of facts at the end of the day. Those inferences try to play and create a storyline that is the most negative, pejorative storyline you can create. But when those get challenged by the facts, as we will in the legal proceedings that both motions and trials will allow us to do, then we will see a totally different story.
Well, that clears everything up, doesn't it? Another corrupt misuse of his Senate power that Senator Menendez is accused of is also intervening in multiple criminal investigations in order to help friends of Will Hanna get out of or get lesser sentences for their criminal prosecutions. Now, one of the criminals allegedly helped by Senator Menendez was a businessman who had been previously convicted of fraud and who had found himself again tangled up in an insurance fraud case. What the indictment alleges is that in exchange for a Mercedes-Benz, after being given details about the case from wifey and Will, Senator Menendez contacted a senior state prosecutor in the office of the New Jersey Attorney General who was supervising the case that had entangled Will's friend and, quoting from the indictment, quote, spoke with him in an attempt through advice and pressure to cause a resolution of the prosecution, unquote, in favor of Will's friend. The indictment says that the state prosecutor, quote, considered Robert Menendez's actions inappropriate and did not agree to intervene, unquote. But in the end, the case was resolved with a guilty plea and a sentence that was less harsh than the prosecutors had offered earlier in the case, before the pressure call from the United States senator. But the case wasn't over, at least not for Will's friend. Because a few months later, in July 2019, the New Jersey Attorney General's office wanted to interview a family member of Will's friend in connection with the insurance fraud case. Will's friend sent wifey Menendez a bunch of texts, which are pretty well summarized in one of the texts, which said, quote, "We need to make things go away," unquote. And it took a few weeks, but eventually Senator Menendez called the same senior state prosecutor in the office of the New Jersey Attorney General and arranged for an in-person meeting at Senator Menendez's Senate office in New Jersey. And during that meeting, Senator Menendez is accused of trying again, quote, through advice and pressure, unquote, to get the prosecutor resolve the investigation in favor of Will's friend's family member. And it's not clear from the indictment what happened in that case. But we do know that Will's friend had a, quote, celebratory dinner, unquote, with the Menendez family, and Will's friend made more than $30,000 worth of payments towards the Mercedes-Benz, which was for Bubbles, and which she needed, by the way, because she killed a dude with her old car and had totaled it. And that's a crash that did not result in Nadine Menendez being tested for alcohol or having her phone investigated for texting while driving, which is something she had been busted for twice. And since this indictment came out, the investigation into that crash has been reopened. But that's not the only prosecution that Senator Menendez interfered in. Senator Menendez is also accused of using his position as a U.S. senator to help a New Jersey real estate developer who was also a founder of a New Jersey-based bank and who also just so happened to be a longtime fundraiser for Senator Menendez. And the way that he helped him was that at the end of 2018, his fundraiser buddy was charged by the United States Attorney General's office in the District of New Jersey with obtaining loans under false pretenses from his own bank. And Senator Menendez allegedly used his position as senator, a position that gives him the power to nominate and vote for and against candidates for U.S. attorney. Well, he used his position to pressure candidates for the U.S. attorney position to intervene in his fundraiser friend's case. And the senator did this by telling a candidate for U.S. attorney during an in-person meeting that Senator Menendez would not recommend him for the job if he recused himself from his fundraiser friend's case. He wanted a friendly overseeing that case. And as the candidate, he said he thought he should recuse himself because he was involved in the fundraiser's case while in private practice. And so after not getting the assurance that he was looking for from the candidate for the U.S. attorney position, not getting the assurance that the U.S. attorney, if given the job, would put himself in a position to help Bob Menendez's fundraiser friend, well, after that, Senator Menendez instead recommended a different person for U.S. attorney, someone that the fundraiser said would be more sympathetic to him as U.S. attorney. However, after President Biden was given that name by Senator Menendez, news reports were published that essentially said that the guy that Senator Menendez and his fundraiser friend wanted was trash. And so we went back to the original candidate. And so Senator Menendez again spoke with the U.S. attorney candidate and again asked if the candidate was going to recuse himself from his fundraiser friend's case. And this time, Senator Menendez was told essentially, no, I probably won't recuse myself. And then, only after getting that answer, did Senator Menendez recommend the candidate to President Biden, who was then nominated, confirmed by the Senate, and sworn in as U.S. attorney. And in the end, the U.S. attorney actually did recuse himself from the fundraiser friend's case. And afterwards, the fundraiser said to wifey Menendez, quote, "This is not his fault. He was amazing in all he did. He's an amazing friend and as loyal as they come," unquote. And while all of this was going on, the fundraiser just happened to gift the senator gold bars and envelopes full of cash. You know, typical friend gifts. So far, Senator Menendez has been accused by the Justice Department of helping a business keep a contract that was hurting U.S. businesses and interfering in our judicial system. But believe it or not, those are actually not the worst of the charges. because Senator Menendez is also accused of putting U.S. personnel serving overseas in danger in 2018. When a few hours after meeting with Egyptian businessman Will Hanna, Senator Menendez asked the State Department for information about the number of and nationality of the people that were currently serving at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo, Egypt. And without telling anyone on his Senate staff or anyone on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee staff or warning anyone at the State Department that he was doing so, Senator Menendez gave the information about the occupants of the embassy in Egypt to his girlfriend, who passed it to her Egyptian businessman buddy, who then gave it to an Egyptian government official. Now, the information he allegedly provided wasn't classified, but was deemed to be, quote, highly sensitive, unquote, because, obviously, insider information about who is physically present in a U.S. embassy in the Middle East is a security concern for so many reasons. Assassination plots come to mind. Terrorist attacks come to mind. That was not public information, and it certainly shouldn't have been given so recklessly to his tall, blonde, unemployed by anyone, but certainly not employed by our government, loser of a girlfriend. This one makes my blood boil, and I can tell you after learning this, I know that Senator Menendez is not someone that I will ever trust with sensitive information. This is an example, at the very least, of shockingly bad judgment, even if the Justice Department can't prove it's a crime. This alone should be cause for Senator Menendez to immediately lose his security clearance, even before we get to the worst part of the indictment, the part that details how Senator Menendez, for years, is being accused of acting as a foreign agent for another country while serving as the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, specifically working as a foreign agent for Egypt. So, here's some backstory that you need to know about our country's relationship with Egypt. Since 1946, the United States has provided Egypt with over $87 billion in foreign aid, with our funding to Egypt increasing significantly after 1979, which is when Egypt decided to play nice with its next-door neighbor Israel, which is apparently our 51st state. But since a coup took place in 2013, which overthrew a democratically elected government in Egypt, Egypt has been ruled by President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who has been doing business with the International Monetary Fund, which is the loan shark of the international financial system that I've nicknamed the World Trade System, that elites, including our current president Joe Biden, have spent their entire careers trying to make the one financial system that should govern the earth. And since 2016, the International Monetary Fund has loaned about $23 billion to Egypt with strings attached, including demands that Egypt permanently allow its currency to be based on nothing, like ours is, and to allow its currency to float according to the whims of the market. Egypt is also expected by the International Monetary Fund to raise fuel prices on its citizens, allowing the citizens to pay more and multinational companies to profit more. Egypt is also expected to privatize more than 30 of its government-owned companies, and Egypt is expected to spend less on programs that benefit the public, which are all demands that fit the pattern that we've been documenting for so many years on Congressional Dish. It's a pattern of strings that are attached to IMF loans all over the world. And as of March of 2023, Egypt is now the second largest International Monetary Fund debtor. They owe the IMF $13.4 billion, which is second only to Argentina. And so, with debts like those, Egypt needs every penny from outside sources that it can get. And since 1979, Congress has been giving Egypt over $1 billion worth of made-in Wall Street corporations weapons for free almost every year. Because nearly all of the U.S. funds for Egypt come from foreign military financing. Now, foreign military financing is a grant program that enables governments to receive equipment and associated military training from the U.S. government. And according to the Government Accountability Office, in general, the way this has worked with Egypt is that the U.S. government buys the weapons on behalf of Egypt and then sends them the goods. And one of the ways that this is sold to Congress every year as a good idea is that all the U.S. military aid to Egypt finances the purchase of weapons systems and warfighting services from U.S. war corporations. And so that's why they say that this is good for America. Everybody wins. Except, of course, for the peasants who get killed by those weapons, but, who cares about that? So basically, Egyptian aid is a subsidy to Egypt and Israel, And it's a subsidy to the corporations that funnel money to the shareholder class by selling things that kill people. And in case you're questioning that interpretation in relation to Israel, I say that because since 2012, the government funding laws have included a requirement that before any weapons can be purchased for Egypt, the Secretary of State has to certify that Egypt is meeting its obligations under the 1979 Egypt-Israel peace treaty. So we are literally paying Egypt with weapons in order to protect Israel. And it's clear as day in our laws. And so I just think that as we watch Congress debate sending billions more of our tax dollars over to Israel to help them do whatever they're doing over there, whether it's defeating whoever they define as Hamas or wiping Gaza off the map, who actually knows what their mission is right now. But as we watch our president beg and our Congress debate sending additional billions of our money to help Israel accomplish their bloody mission, as we see the press report over and over that we send $3.8 billion to Israel every year, which we do, we should also keep in mind that we subsidize Israel's government in other more subtle ways, like paying billions of dollars per year to pay Israel's neighbors to be cool. So, I digress. Going back to Egypt. Basically, the World Trade System has Egypt by the balls. And Egypt wants our money to be spent buying its weapons because that's one fewer thing that Egypt has to spend its cash on if we're providing them weapons for free. And when Congress appropriates foreign military financing to Egypt, it typically makes those funds available for 2 years only, meaning that funds for Egyptian weapons expire if they're not used. And so, like I said, for the past few years, Congress has approved $1.3 billion per year in foreign military financing for Egypt. But the Biden administration, since taking power in 2021, along with Congress, has refused to send about $335 million in expected foreign military financing weapons to Egypt. And before the Biden administration, the Trump administration refused to spend about $65 million on weapons from our fiscal year 2017 tax money that Egypt was expecting. And some of that money was withheld because of holds put on the money by members of Congress. Democratic Senator Patrick Leahy, in particular, has personally ensured that Egypt did not receive $75 million in recent years. And so holds placed by members of Congress on foreign military financing can make a big difference in the finances of Egypt, which again gets damn near all, over 90% of its money from the United States in the form of foreign military financing. And so, now that you understand the significance of foreign military financing for Egypt, let's get back to then chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Bob Menendez. Because in May of 2018, Senator Menendez had dinner with the Egyptian businessman Will Hanna, and during dinner, Senator Menendez gave Will Hanna private U.S. government information about the status of some foreign military sales to Egypt, which Egyptian businessman Will Hanna then texted to an Egyptian government official. And then a few weeks later, an Egyptian government official contacted wifey Menendez to ask her to get her senator husband to help lobby other senators to support sending free military equipment to Egypt. And Senator Menendez, knowing that this was a request that came from an Egyptian government official, secretly wrote a letter on behalf of Egypt to other United States senators requesting that they release a hold on $300 million worth of military equipment to Egypt, which was being held back because of human rights abuses being committed by the government of Egypt. And so, put another way, Senator Menendez essentially, allegedly, served as a ghostwriter for Egypt's government, knowing exactly what to say to sway his coworkers. He was basically lobbying for Egypt. And in addition to that secret lobbying work on behalf of Egypt, Senator Menendez also directly approved foreign military financing for Egypt, using his position as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which made him one of only 4 members of Congress with the power to personally approve or hold foreign military financing to other countries. And a few months after writing the letter for Egypt that was sent to other senators, Senator Menendez and his wife had a meeting with multiple Egyptian government officials and Egyptian businessman Will Hanna. And the very next day, Senator Bob Menendez texted his wife, that he was personally approving a foreign military sale to Egypt worth $99 million, and then detailed what weapons exactly would be a part of the sale. Again, wifey Bubbles Menendez did not work for our government and never has. She had no business being given non-public information about weapons sales to Egypt, which wifey then gave to her Egyptian businessman friend, who then gave the information to members of the Egyptian government. Here's David Cruz on PBS Chatbox, who asked Senator Menendez about this too.
So the considerations that Egypt received, including getting a green light from your committee, the quid pro quo, as it were, was Egypt behaving better in exchange for arms sales and other considerations?
Each consideration depended upon the nature of the sale, whether it was, for example, defensive equipment, whether it was equipment for the Sinai, where they are playing a vital role for security with Israel, which everybody, Democrats and Republicans, have called for. So these followed the traditional uses of both foreign aid and arms sales in a way to ensure that the U.S. national security interest was pursued. And that's simply the case.
Oh, so he just did all of this for U.S. national security interests. Makes perfect sense. And then finally, the indictment in the section that outlines how Senator Menendez allegedly acted as a foreign agent for years as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. It tells the story about how Senator Menendez, after meeting with some of the highest-ranking officials in the Egyptian government, involved himself on Egypt's behalf in a bitter water war. Now, what you need to understand is that Egypt relies on the Nile River for hydroelectricity, agriculture, and most of its domestic water needs. And therefore, it treats restrictions on the flow of the Nile from upstream countries as an existential threat. And Egypt has been really angry with Ethiopia for years because Ethiopia constructed a huge hydroelectric dam on the Nile called the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which is also nicknamed GERD. Egypt is afraid that the GERD Dam in Ethiopia will limit the flow of the Nile below what Egypt expects to get, according to a deal it made with the country that's sandwiched between Ethiopia and Egypt, which is Sudan. A deal that, by the way, Ethiopia wasn't a part of and yet is expected to honor. But in a part of the world that experiences frequent, crippling droughts, this issue is not even close to resolved. But in 2021, Egypt and Sudan signed a military cooperation agreement covering training and border security. And so it appears that Egypt and Sudan have some kind of understanding with each other. Ethiopia is Egypt's enemy in this water war. And so keeping that in mind, the indictment says that in March of 2020, Bubbles texted an Egyptian government official and said, quote, "Anytime you need anything, you have my number and we will make everything happen," unquote. And a few days after that text, she arranged for Senator Menendez to meet with an Egyptian official, whom wifey Menendez referred to as the general, regarding negotiations between Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan over that Ethiopian dam. And while they're not named in the indictment, the New York Times has reported that the officials that wifey Menendez was arranging meetings for with Senator Menendez were General Abbas Kamal, who is the chief of Egypt's General Intelligence Service, and General Ahmed Helmi, who is Egypt's top spy in Washington. And so these were not meetings with some rando backbenchers. These were some of the most powerful people in Egypt. And after these meetings were arranged in April 2020, Senator Menendez wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Treasury and the Secretary of State regarding the dam, beginning the letter, quote, "I am writing to express my concern about the stalled negotiations between Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan over the dam. And I therefore urge you to significantly increase the State Department's engagement on negotiations surrounding the dam," unquote. And he kept up his pressure on the State Department in particular to intervene in the dam dispute for years. And so here's Senator Menendez over a year later on May 27, 2021, in a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing that he chaired about Ethiopia, during which he is speaking to officials from the State Department and USAID in a conversation that was broadcast on C-SPAN and therefore can be seen easily by any Egyptian official with internet access.
And then finally, I will make a comment. It's not a question. I've spoken to the Egyptians on more than one occasion on this issue at their behest. I have a real sense that if the GERD issue is not dealt with in a way that assures them of their concerns about the Nile flowing into what would be the heart of their water supply in Egypt, that they will do what is necessary. I don't like red lines, but they have suggested that they have red lines. And I take them at their word that they have red lines. Not that they are desirous of doing that. They also have very strong expression that they hope to have a resolution peacefully, but that they have their own red lines. I hope that we are engaging in that very robustly, because the last thing we need, in addition to everything that is going on in Ethiopia, in addition to the possibility of a famine, to the sexual violence that is taking place, is to then have a military conflict over the GERD. So I just seriously hope we are fully engaged and understand where the parties are and how serious some of them are of purpose.
And then, about 6 months after providing that not at all veiled threat of violence against Ethiopia that he straight up admits he was providing on behalf of Egyptian officials, Senator Menendez wrote a bill that cuts off all aid to Ethiopia and would sanction anyone who provides weapons to anyone in Ethiopia, basically ensuring that no matter who rules the government of Ethiopia, they would be incapable of effectively fighting any attacks from their neighbors, including Egypt. And that bill didn't move, and so it's not law. But the point is, Senator Menendez wrote that. Now, Senator Menendez hasn't been convicted of anything, and I believe strongly in due process and people getting their day in court. But if a senator were a mole for Egypt, are these actions that an Egyptian mole would or would not do? And isn't the fact that we are seriously questioning these actions, these matters of war, a problem in and of itself? Because even if you want to give Senator Menendez the benefit of the doubt, because maybe he just really thinks that Egypt is the angel and Ethiopia is the devil in this water dispute. And maybe he really believed that his fundraising friend and Will Hanna's criminal friend were innocent and deserved leniency. And maybe he somehow believed that a monopoly in Egypt that was overcharging U.S. businesses was a good thing for, economic reasons that we're all just too stupid to understand. Even if you want to give him the benefit of the doubt, the indictment lists so many valuable items that Senator and Bubbles Menendez received at the same time that he was doing these things that benefited the Egyptian businessman, his friends, the fundraiser, and the Egyptian government officials. So I already mentioned that Bubbles got her Mercedes-Benz in returns for her husband intervening in criminal investigations for Will Hanna's friends. And I mentioned the consulting job for wifey Menendez, which in practice was a $30,000 payment for her arranging meetings between her senator husband and Egyptian businessmen and government officials. But the Egyptian businessman Will Hanna also paid off $23,000 of wifey Menendez's mortgage while she was still girlfriend Menendez. And he also bought the senator and Bubbles a bunch of furniture that was worth thousands of dollars. The senator and Bubbles were also found with $480,000 in cash, which was spread all over their house. They had cash stuffed in envelopes and hidden in a safe. They had cash in his closet. They had cash in his clothes, including a jacket that was embroidered with his name, Robert Menendez, and the logo for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. And there was cash found in another jacket embroidered with the name Senator Menendez. And those envelopes with all the cash in it had the fingerprints of the guys who were accused of bribing the Menendez family on them. And then finally, in the part of this indictment I think everybody's heard of by this point, law enforcement found over $100,000 worth of gold bars in Senator Menendez's home, which had the fingerprints of the men who were accused of bribing the Menendez family on them, along with unique serial numbers which proved that those gold bars were purchased by Will Hanna, the Egyptian businessman, who was friends with Bubbles. And so how did Senator Menendez explain this on PBS?
I have drawn from my personal credit union savings account for the better part of 30 years, $400 every week in cash. And while that may seem old-fashioned, or some people may think of it as crazy, the reality is that the government has those records. They have the accounts that show that, and they chose not to use it. So this is why I look forward to being in a position to actually speak to these issues so that New Jerseyans will have a different set of facts than the ones they have right now.
Mm-hmm. And which ATM spits out gold bars? I'd like to find that one, please. And so where does this leave us? Well, it leaves us with the United States Senate hosting a sitting senator who has been federally indicted on charges of conspiracy to commit bribery, conspiracy to commit fraud, conspiracy to commit extortion, and conspiracy for a public official to act as a foreign agent, amongst other charges for declaring none of all those riches on any of his reports. And by the way, if all of this goes to trial, this is going to be Senator Menendez's second corruption trial in this decade. So in 2015, Senator Menendez was indicted for accepting domestic and international flights on private jets, first-class domestic airfare, use of a Caribbean villa, access to an exclusive Dominican resort, a stay at a luxury hotel in Paris, expensive meals, golf outings, $40,000 in contributions to his legal defense fund, and over $750,000 in contributions to entities, most of it to a super PAC, that benefited Senator Menendez's 2012 Senate campaign, none of which was declared on his financial disclosure reports. In return for helping out a rich eye doctor friend of his get multiple foreign girlfriends their visas to help them come and stay in the United States, pressuring the State Department to let his friend keep a monopoly contract in a foreign country, sound familiar? And trying to stop the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services from forcing his friend to pay back almost $9 million that he had overcharged and therefore stolen from U.S. taxpayers. And in that case, Senator Menendez's defense didn't really seem to deny that any of that happened, but instead said that the meals and the flights and vacations and hundreds of thousands of dollars were just a gift from a friend, and that Senator Menendez, in trying to help his friend, was just doing what he thought was right. Which means, apparently, that Senator Menendez thinks that essentially stealing $9 million from taxpayers is perfectly fine. And in that trial, Senator Menendez was not acquitted. There was a hung jury, as in some jurors said he was guilty and some said he was not guilty, and they couldn't come to a unanimous decision. And so, here we go again. And I believe strongly in due process. I really do. I really do believe in people being innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. And due process within the justice system will determine whether Senator Menendez and Bubbles and their friends will or will not go to jail or pay fines or be forever labeled as criminals and traitors to the United States. But due process in the judicial system does not entitle a senator to keep his position of power. And since this indictment was released, Senator Menendez was removed as the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on September 22nd. But here's a little clip montage of some of the things that Senator Menendez said over a month later on October 28th, after the senator was charged by the Justice Department for being a possible agent for a foreign country. This is what he said in the PBS interview.
I have not missed a beat. I've been here for votes and for hearings and for pursuing the issues that are important to the people of New Jersey. I was not barred from going into an intelligence briefing. I still have all of my intelligence credentials. I still serve on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which gives me a perch on all of these global issues. And I am pursuing them in the same ways I did before. The difference is that I am not leading the committee, but I am very much active in the committee and pursuing the things that I care about for New Jerseyans.
For New Jerseyans or for Egyptians? That's a real legitimate question. The problem here is that Senator Menendez, by his own admission, still has so much power. And so 5 days after that interview, one of Menendez's fellow Democrats, Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, introduced a resolution that would strip any senator facing such charges of their committee assignments, prohibit them from accessing classified information or classified briefings, and bar them from requesting earmarks or using official funds for international travel. And when he introduced it, Senator Fetterman said, quote, "When you find gold bars stuffed in a mattress, the jokes write themselves. But our national security isn't funny. It's often life and death." The Senate has an obligation to its constituents and this country to do everything it can to protect national security. And that means making sure that senators who are currently indicted for acting as agents of foreign powers don't have access to our most sensitive national secrets, unquote. Which sounds about right to me. But so far, the Democrats who control the Senate have done nothing with this resolution. And there doesn't seem to be any talk at all about removing this possible foreign agent from the United States Congress. In fact, the conversation in D.C. seems to be, well, do you think Senator Menendez will run for re-election or not in 2024? Like, what's the matter with these people? And so looking at the situations for our two indicteds in Congress right now, the thing I'm most struck by is the difference between what kind of self-policing Congress seems to be poised to inflict upon the two of them. Because in the House, George Santos is very likely to get kicked out of Congress and soon for robbing donors and deceiving a political party. How dare he? But Bob Menendez is being permitted to remain a senator with security clearance, despite being accused credibly by the Justice Department of being an agent for a foreign country and using his position of power to do things that demonstrably have hurt Americans. Because he was reckless with the lives of those that were staffed in our embassy in Cairo, but giving information to his trophy wife and therefore the Egyptians, not knowing how it would be used and not giving the State Department a heads up that the information was out there. He also hurt American businesses who complained that the monopoly business in Egypt that was paying his wife was overcharging and therefore increasing prices for all of us. And he's made official requests and written a bill that concerns matters of war, because sanctions are weapons of economic war. And all of these issues have to do with who gets weapons in the Middle East. And we really don't know if he has done these things because he's acting in a way that helps the American people, or if he's acting to help Egyptian officials in return for bribes. And we should never have to question what country is being represented when a senator makes a war-related decision, financially or physically. Now, George Santos doesn't deserve to be in Congress, in my opinion. I welcome his expulsion because he's a clear thief and a con artist. But the truth is that George Santos is a backbencher in the House. And as a member of the House of Representatives, he is a drop in a sea of lunatics over there right now. He's just one of 435. But Bob Menendez in the Senate, he's 1 out of 100. So he has far more power just by the numbers in his branch of Congress. But on top of that, he's a longtime leader of the ruling party, the Democrats, in that branch of Congress. And while the House Republicans are soon going to act for the second time and likely expel the alleged criminal in their own party from their branch of Congress, the Democrats in the Senate are poised to do no such thing to Bob Menendez, despite his charges accusing him of demonstrably harming American businesses, putting Americans in danger, and having questionable motives in matters of war. George Santos in power doesn't necessarily scare me, but that's the threat that they're going to eliminate. But Bob Menendez's power scares me quite a bit, and there's no signs that he's going to lose it. And so if you're someone who's concerned about this, and you're going to be breaking bread with anyone who has a senator who belongs to the Democratic Party, this might be a worthwhile story to tell. Because Democrats don't seem to be facing much pressure to take away Bob Menendez's security clearance or remove him from Congress, while House Republicans, the craziest people I've ever seen in Congress right now, they are the ones who are clearly concerned about being associated with George Santos and are about to do the right thing and remove him from power. You know, when you have the House Republicans showing you the right thing to do, it doesn't speak well about your party. And you know, I kind of get it, because the Santos story with the identity theft and the Botox and the OnlyFans, his story is juicy and ridiculous and easy to understand. So I can understand why the House Republicans would feel more pressure there, because everybody gets the corruption there. The Menendez story is more complicated, but it's also the one that really matters. And Senator Menendez is the one who's still scheduled to remain in power for over a year, unless we make Democrats fear for their re-elections the way that keeping George Santos is making the House Republicans fear for theirs. We have 2 indicteds in Congress right now, not 1. And so I'm hoping over the holidays, you won't let your loved ones forget it. So there was a rabbit hole from the George Santos indictment that I didn't want to wander off into in the middle of those stories, but I do want to take a minute to marinate on the political calculus that George Santos made as he committed some of his alleged crimes. Because what we learned in his indictment was that to qualify to run as a Republican, and I only know about this because it's in the indictment, so I'm sure the Democrats do similar things, but to run as a Republican, the National Party will provide financial and logistical support for congressional candidates who qualify for their so-called program. And the qualifications to be the official Republican candidate, the qualifications are all about money. So what I learned is that the Republican program has 3 phases. In at least 2 of the phases, candidates are required to demonstrate their campaign committee's ability to raise at least $250,000 from third-party contributors in a single quarter, and then do it all over again. And I just looked at this, and I just think that systemically, this is a real problem because the House of Representatives is the cheapest federal office to run for. And so it's the one that someone like me would go for if I wanted to run for a congressional office and be a part of one of the big 2 parties. But what I'm hearing here is that the party would want me to go around begging rich people to give me enough money to buy an actual house before I could be their official candidate. And this really causes the campaign to become less about reaching voters and much more about reaching wealthy donors. Because much of what broke-ass Santos did when he wasn't pampering himself was done so that he could pretend that he was kissing enough rich ass and collecting enough money to satisfy the party masters. You know, party fundraising was his focus, and it was causing him a lot of stress. So George Santos is quoted in the indictment as saying that he was, quote, lost and desperate, unquote, when it comes to the fundraising. And then he complained after faking $250,000 in donations in one quarter, which he was expected to do again in the next quarter. He complained, quote, I have my back against the wall this quarter, unquote. You know, he was really concerned about this money, but shouldn't his concern have been, you know, how to meet the most voters or how to find out what we voters need or how to best create a staff that would serve the district well and then introduce them as the team to the district, stuff like that? Because if you're stressed about raising money for the party, enough money to buy a nice house just to hand it over to the party masters, how can a candidate even have time to do all of the other stuff? It seems to me like those financial quotas warp the entire campaign and therefore election system. It seems to me that the purpose of the election season goes from winning votes via policy proposals to proving to party bosses that rich people will give you money and do it quickly. And this is really discouraging because, you know, since before I even started this podcast, I've had daydreams about what it would feel like to be in the House of Representatives, to be in the room, to make the point, like when we're about to fire the speaker, that, hey, maybe I should raise my hand and be like, by the way, the next guy could be worse, which was a point that no one in the Democratic Party bothered to make. Like I have these daydreams of, now that I understand how Congress works, being there. And I don't know how much difference I could make there as just one person, but I could certainly explain to you what goes on there better from the inside, you know? So I have these daydreams about, okay, well, how would I actually run? And not that I would actually feel at home in either of the big 2 parties, but I just feel like the more I learn about how the parties operate, I just couldn't run in either of them because I just wouldn't participate in the money funneling scheme. And it seems like if you don't participate, they just won't acknowledge you as a candidate. And it just seems like the people in the politics industry, it seems to me that the ickiness of the entire system isn't really being exposed and explained widely because there are so many people, especially in DC, who are making so much money by taking a cut from this corrupt system. Because all of that money raised by the candidates and spent by campaigns, these indictments also served as a reminder of where it goes. So like as a candidate, being a candidate, it's a lifestyle. You know, George Santos only got in trouble for the hotels and flights and meals that took place in locations where there was no campaign event. But throw a party in your honor and put campaign on the invitations, and all those things are paid for with other people's money. A penny saved is a penny earned. And by being a candidate and participating in the donation schemes, there's a lot of expenses that you don't have to pay out of your own pocket. Sounds like a pretty cushy gig. And then there's the middlemen, the consultants. And we saw the bullshittery that is the consultant business on display in both of the indictments. George Santos set up 2 political consulting firms and was paid by campaigns. And wifey Menendez set up a consulting firm to get paid for arranging meetings between powerful Egyptians and her powerful senator husband. Getting paid for knowing people and schmoozing. It's a hell of a cushy gig if you can get it. And we've discussed many times that much of the money in this financial web is spent on advertisements. And so the corporate media doesn't have any incentive to call out any of this, to explain the corrupt financial web that is our political system, because the corporate media, the people that make their money on TV or in radio, anyone that airs ads that are paid for by campaigns, they are the main beneficiaries of the largesse. So why would they tell us how fucked up the system is? The more I learn about it, our politics just looks to me like one big financial scam with so many people involved in that. It's like it's a scam that's so big and so accepted by the powerful, that we regular people, we seem to be accepting it as normal too. And I'm kind of pondering, like when I see how regular people are trying to affect this system, instead of demanding that the system of legal bribes and cushy candidate lifestyles and middlemen consultants and complicit ad airing media be dismantled, instead us littles for at least the last, 10, 20 years have been trying to basically crowdfund in order to try to be players in their game. And I guess what I'm saying is, shouldn't we try to shut down the whole money game at the center of our election process? Like, isn't the system itself the problem? Because if I were to ever run for the House, I wouldn't want to do it their way. Those requirements, $500,000 to the party in 6 months, or else you can't sit with us, that shouldn't be a requirement to represent our neighbors as lawmakers. The people that I would trust with making laws are not the people that would find that system acceptable. And so we end up with morally wish-washy people who do agree to be a part of that system. And then our government becomes what it currently is, staffed with people that we don't trust because they're not trustworthy. And I just feel like it all starts with the corrupt candidate application process, right? And I do think that we'd be better served by fighting the money-based system itself and fundamentally changing it, instead of trying to pool our shekels and hoping that the powerful pay attention to us too. Now, how do we do that? Well, that's the part I haven't figured out yet. But yeah, the idea that we can out-fund them $20 at a time, I'm really questioning the strategy. I don't think I like it at all. And so I guess I just wanted to put that out there. But I do think, even though like big picture, I don't really know what to do about it, I do think that here at Congressional Dish, we're at least playing a small part in trying to change that system by refusing the ad money. Because 'tis the season when candidates would love to pay me to endorse them on this show. And I turned down all of those offers for quite a bit of money because you fund this show enough. And I live cheaply enough. And I don't have dreams of being a billionaire. I do believe in the concept of enough. And because of you, I have enough and can produce this show outside of that web. And I'm extremely proud of that and extremely thankful for you for making it possible. So yeah, if you want to be a part of this project, the support page on congressionaldish.com are all the ways that you can do it. And I do want to just take a second really quick and express my thanks. I love that this is the person who is my executive producer for this episode, but Troy Heinrichs has hit another 535. And so he is going to be our executive producer for episode 282, Chaos Fires McCarthy. And Troy is one of my IRL friends. And it's very exciting to me when, people that I've known since before the podcast was successful, when they are supporting this show for so long. And Troy, your support means so much to me. So, thanks for hitting another executive producer credit. And with his message in regards to the episode he picked, he said, I will proudly add to the 282 McCarthy episode. There's so much info there and so many need to hear it heading into the election cycle. Keep up the great work, my friend. Well, I'm going to keep it up, and that is with your help, and it's so appreciated. Thank you to all the executive producers. Thank you to all the regular producers. Thank you to everyone who is on Patreon. You know, knowing that every time I press publish, I will have a certain amount of money that comes in, because the one-time donations, I can't count on them. I love them, especially the ones with notes. We have a Chad who sends me PayPal donations all the time. And it'll be for a bunch of different numbers and for a bunch of different reasons. But I love getting the PayPal notifications from my Chad, because he tells me, this is for this episode. This is my opinion on the episode. And I love the notes that you guys send in with the donations. And it really helps me understand which episodes are valuable for you as I look forward and look through all the hearings and try and pick which topic I'm going to spend the next few weeks of my life on. I love it when you guys tell me why you're paying. And so I just love this whole system. I'm so thankful for it. And so, yeah, thank you so much. As for what's coming up on Congressional Dish, our government got funded with a clean continuing resolution. So I don't have an episode about what just went down with the November 17th deadline for government funding. What I can tell you is that the continuing resolution takes 4 parts of our government funding out of 12 and pushes it to January 19th. And then the other 8 will expire on February 2nd. So it's the first time I've ever seen 2 different deadlines like that. They called it a laddered continuing resolution. I actually kind of like this strategy, because it means that when they come back to work, it'll be like, okay, we need to work on these 4 first and then these 8 second. So, but that also requires them to work. So, who knows what's going to happen. But I've decided that in December, I'm going to pay attention to what happens in between the 2 holidays, and I'll give you some kind of episode, because there's still really no signs of Congress appropriating money for either the Ukraine or Israel war, which is quite shocking to me. I figured by now that there would be money going towards the wars. So I'm confused about what's happening. So yeah, I can't predict what's going to happen, but I've decided in December I'll give you 1 episode, and then I'm going to take the holidays off, which I have never done since I started Congressional Dish. But I think I need a few weeks of not thinking about this stuff. And then in January and February, I'll be reading the defense authorization, which that's a crazy one too. For something like 65 years, Congress has never failed to authorize all of the war activities in the National Defense Authorization Act. It's passed every single year. It's the only thing they get done on time. But this year, there's a chance they might not. Yeah, this Congress just continues to suck at historic levels. And so I don't know if they're going to finish that on time, but they have to do it at some point. So we have the NDAA coming up, then we'll have government funding. Like the beginning of next year is going to be really intense. And so I'm going to rest up and get ready for those very long bills. But yeah, so thank you to Mike, my editor. Thank you to Claire, who is doing a beautiful job with our show notes and our sound clips. Thank you to my sister, who's still the accountant. And thank you to Mark, who made our website ADA accessible, which is very cool. And thank you to just everyone who's made this podcast possible. I'm so thankful for you. And I'm really excited to keep doing this. I'm going to keep doing this. And I'm going to do it with you. So yeah, have a very happy Thanksgiving, and I will be back telling you something in the middle of December. Take care. Bye.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screens.
We don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite the many in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. With the facts. And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright, if the end will justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it lies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. We are so damn tired of being lied to.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can't stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. Now we're not keeping quiet.
These bills represent common sense, bipartisan solutions that actually solve problems.